Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to continue further in our series on 20th century world literature. Dear friends, today we are going to talk on literature in Vietnam, and for the discussion we have with us in our studios Professor Anand Prakash. Professor Anand Prakash is a retired professor of English from Delhi University. He is a renowned professor. Through him, we always get in-depth knowledge on various topics, various issues. Friends, if you have any question while listening to us, feel free to talk to us through our toll-free number. Our toll-free number is 1-800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1-800-110-430. Friends, you are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture only, as well as we request you to ask questions relevant to the topic only. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Professor Anand Prakash, once again, and would request him to give us in-depth knowledge on today's topic, that is literature in Vietnam. Hello, sir. Welcome to the session.
Thank you, Geetika, and welcome viewers. And today's topic is literature in Vietnam. And we all know about Vietnam, particularly in the context of the 20th century tussle that they went through against the mightiest country in the world. And finally, they came out victorious. And we have been wondering whether any serious kind of literature would have been written in the last 50 or 60 years, because Vietnam was embroiled in that war. Our query is more than satisfied by the reading that we might have of literature coming from Vietnam, even during the period when it was involved in the fight against US imperialism. And before I give you specimens of writing, or I tell you about the writing, let me give a bit of background information about Vietnam. Vietnam is a Southeast Asian country, quite close to us, and it has one language only, Vietnamese language, and that is spoken all over the country. It is described as unitary Marxist-Leninist one-party socialist republic. That's a long word. So let me tell you, unitary. Unitary is it's one entity, and it is centralized, in the system of a special kind. And it does not allow any kind of divisions, any kind of separations, policy-wise, or even at the level of imagination. It is one country and is committed to remain one country all across. Marxist-Leninist one-party socialist republic. Socialist republic is the first thing that comes to our notice. I don't think we have discussed literature from any country, maybe barring one or two, which are socialist in this sense. But it's a socialist republic, by which I mean that the means of production and the resources are socialized. They are not owned by an individual or a group of individuals. All resources are owned by the society as a whole. And so under socialism, if policies are made, they are made keeping in mind the requirements and needs of the people. So if education is required, if work is required, if peace is required, if some kind of a struggle is required, all those things have to be from the point of view of the society that is supposed to be served by the politics of the nation. So that is what socialist republic is. Republic, of course, is very clear. Republic is such a big word and such a good word that even countries which don't believe in republicanism and in the public interest, they also call themselves a republic. But this is a country which is not just a republic, it's also a socialist republic, to make it clear. What is Marxist-Leninist? We have heard this word again and again in the political discourse in India. But if one goes into the theory of it, a Marxist-Leninist actually is a Marxist, and Lenin was a Marxist himself. But we call it Marxist-Leninist sometimes because Marx did not have the opportunity to change the society. He had the opportunity to talk about society, critique the existing societies of the time in the 19th century when he was alive, and he could not put his ideas into practice. But Lenin in the 20th century, early 20th century, got involved in turning the theory into practice. And he also, in the course of changing the Russia's political landscape, while changing it, he also evolved the Marxist theory further and added immensely to it, in fact, and so much that later Marxists would borrow, would take a large number of insights from Lenin himself. That's why in the 20th century the word became Marxist Leninist. And in the case of Vietnam, Vietnam was waging a war against another country, but not alone. Of course, the other country was supported by capitalism all across the world, but Vietnam also was supported by the socialist bloc in the world. I talk of the time when the Second World War had ended, and different imperialisms in the country. When I say different imperialisms, two particularly come to mind: the English imperialism, the British imperialism, that is, or the French imperialism. Of course, there was German imperialism also. So these are different imperialisms in the pre-Second World War period. So far as Vietnam was concerned, it was initially under the hand of French imperialism. So that's what is to be kept in mind while we discuss Vietnam. The second point I discuss is that today it is the fastest growing economies in the world, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. What does it mean, and how does it happen? Today means in the last 20 years, last 30 years. I believe that economies grow fast only when the resources involve human resources generally, and human beings, when they are working for themselves, when they are working for their own interests, for their children, for their friends, for their families, and the whole country of which they are an integrated part, then they work hard. And even if they face difficulties, they face the difficulties together. So that gives a kind of boost to the economy, because you are directly involved in the fruits of the economy that you are following, that you are observing. And in the other kind of economies, like capitalist economy, the person is a wage earner. Ordinary person is a wage earner, and there are hours that are fixed for the work. And whatever the person works, the fruits of it go not just to the worker oneself, but to the owner of the resources. Therefore, the worker is not directly involved in the production. The production has to be managed as a whole by another agency, and that agency actually is ranged against the worker, if not against the worker, at least away from the worker. So keep that in mind. Economies grow fast because all people in the country are involved in the making of it. So maybe that's the reason why I say that it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world, because the people are directly taking interest in its running and in the observance of its policies. The first settlers in Vietnam came in the 15th century. This is another information that is going to be of interest to you, from the north, and north would mean the North Vietnam. It would also mean the neighboring countries. Maybe people came from there. Chinese would have come from there, and these people settled in Vietnam in the 15th century, and which means it is somewhat like Australia. One can ask this question from oneself, and there is no definitive answer, but yes, there were original inhabitants in Vietnam before the 15th century, and they would have been treated, I believe, rather cruelly, repressively by the settlers, new settlers. But that's a question of history, and that happened many centuries ago. And but this is to be kept in mind, that because settlers came from one integrated culture, speaking one language, or languages which were very close to one another. Therefore, these settlers gave a kind of identity to the new island, that they were adopting for living in. So Aborigines living there before the settlers arrived, they would have been crushed, they would have been tackled, they would have been finally integrated into the settlers' culture, settlers' language. All that is history, and it's not very important for us today. But then there were divisions in the Vietnamese history right from the beginning that the settlers came. Then Vietnamese are in an unusual situation, and this is an important point, because situation is such that initially they are also somewhat exploitative, because they come from outside. So they are in the unusual situation of being both colonizers themselves and the victims of colonization by others. So, when I say this, initially they colonized. I don't think this is a good word to use. I'm using a quotation, but then somebody is putting Vietnamese against the other people and is presenting them as colonizers. I don't think in the 15th century people would have bothered much about colonizing something, and if they come to settle, you see, there is a difference always between people who come from outside, rob us of our resources and go back or send their money elsewhere, and there are others who come from outside and they settle here, and settling does not make it a colony. This is my view. Maybe you can differ, maybe others can differ, but if somebody comes here to settle down, that person is not a colonizer. So that's the difficulty with accepting this particular quotation. But then victims of colonization by others, this is true, because French had no direct connection with Vietnam. They came from outside. They came to, their word was modernization. They wanted to modernize Vietnam maybe. So they must have set up industry. They must have used it as a trade center. They might have used it as a supplier of raw materials, whatever form. But French people could never be called Vietnamese people, because they never settled here. They came here. They had their own armies, and their army, would recruit the Vietnamese against Vietnam. That always happens in a colony. So that would have happened. So they were victims of colonization, definitely, and of the French people. Their country expanded. Now this is an important statement, and this is the gist of what I am going to say. Their country expanded. It became bigger than before. They must have progressed at some point of time. It shrunk. It became narrow. It split into two parts. Now, of course, we know there is a North Vietnam and there was a South Vietnam. Now there is just one Vietnam, but northern part is called North Vietnam, southern part is called South Vietnam, till the country becomes free from the stranglehold of America. And in between you have people fighting against each other even within Vietnam. So it shrinks. So it shrunk at that point of time. It split also, because the Americans were occupying the southern part of Vietnam, and they were doing it directly and indirectly. Directly in the sense that there were American armies on the soil of Vietnam, and indirectly that they were propping up one ruler after another, and that ruler would be a Vietnamese. So there was a kind of division, and there was a kind of split, as is said here. Split and sometimes disappeared. Now this is the most worrying part. Disappearing means that you are very near extinction, very near death. So maybe Vietnam for some point of time would be totally bombarded, and the people who were bombarded Vietnam would wish that this country was made to disappear forever. So this is the kind of tragedy that they have suffered for a very long time, and then under circumstances way beyond their control. There were circumstances like they could not control the person who came from outside, the forces that came from outside, the armies that came from America, and they were armed to the hilt, and they were bombarding the country as if they were exterminating mosquitoes. That kind of bombarding, we can't even imagine the kind of bombarding that Vietnam suffered in the 1950s and 60s. So anyway, now that's a part of history. It is to be kept in mind. Vietnam, the way it has suffered, I don't think any other country, any other people would have suffered as badly as Vietnam did. So two phases of resistance. This I have already indicated that there are two phases. One phase is the resistance to the French when French have colonized Vietnam. So that is the first phase, and the second is American imperialism. So America comes into operation much later in the late 1950s and 60s, and then there are two phases. Are they different? Yes, they are different, because America is mightier. America has more of military resources. They have more destructive power, and they are even nature-wise. I am not talking about American people. American people are very peace-loving. They are very dynamic. I am not talking about the people. I say that the American regime is much more ruthless even than the French regime. So when French regime went away and American imperialism took over, then things became from bad to worse. So these are the two phases. Now the first phase is 1945, August 19, the August Revolution. This is called the first revolution, and this is revolution proper, in the sense, that this person Ho Chi Minh, he makes his armies enter Hanoi. Hanoi was I think under the French occupation, and people were fighting it in such a manner that finally they would occupy Hanoi and keep it under their control. So Ho Chi Minh in September 2 in the same year, 1945, he proclaims Vietnam's independence and the establishment of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. He calls it democratic. Now you should keep in mind these two words, the Socialist Republic and the Democratic Republic. Ho Chi Minh, initially the great leader of Vietnam, unquestioned representative of the people, he called it Democratic Republic, which means that he wanted to get power for the people, and he wanted to also take them along with him, so that through discussion, through dialogue, through analysis, he could take them along. He would learn from them and they would learn from him. And democracy is that kind of a thing. And I believe socialism also would not be worth anything if it's not democratic. So the first thing which I said, unitary. Socialism, if it's unitary, it's not as good as if it is it has diversity. So Democratic Republic is formed, is announced by Ho Chi Minh in 1945. 1946 December, the French-Indonesian war begins. Indochina's war begins. So now there is a war because Ho Chi Minh has already acquired the control of Hanoi. 54, 8 years later, the French garrison at Dien Bien Phu falls to the Viet Minh. Ho Chi Minh wins it. 54. It took him 8 years to snatch the control of Vietnam from the French. What happens then? Then there is an international conference to decide as to what's going to happen. Now keep in mind the year 1954. Second World War ended 8 or 9 years ago in 1945 or 6, and after that there was a regrouping of the world under socialism, under capitalism, under imperialism, or outside them as a category called the Third World. So at that point of time, some agencies and some organizations had emerged at the world level, and one of them was the idea that international conferences will meet somewhere and they will decide about the fate of those countries which were facing problems. So about Vietnam, there was a discussion in July 2020 on July 2021 in 54, and this created provisions of demarcation line at the 17th parallel that divides Vietnam pending a political settlement to be achieved by the nationwide elections. I think this was very sensible, that the world at that point of time decided to tell Vietnam that there will be after 2 years a kind of referendum, a kind of an election, nationwide election, and that election will decide whether Vietnam is to be ruled by this or that power. This was a very sensible thing, and the French supporters of the government and Emperor Bao Dai denounces the agreement. He is an emperor, and emperor does not like elections the way a democrat would like elections. So the way the international conference decided, that way was not acceptable for the solution of the Vietnamese problem. So the emperor, this Emperor Bao Dai, he denounced the agreements reached there. So already there was a dissension. People wanted to be part of the process of agreement along electoral lines, but that was not supported by the king or the emperor there. 55, Saigon, Bao Dar's prime minister Ngo Dinh Diem defeats Bao Dai, the king, in a referendum. So there is a referendum finally, and in that referendum there is another leader in South Vietnam. That leader wins, defeating the representative of the king. So that's one development, but then there is a catch there, and the catch is that this particular defender of Saigon's interests, and who is attacking and who has defeated the King Emperor, actually is supported by America. So America in a way is putting up this democratic head to fight the battle against the North, that is that part which is already Democratic Republic and led by. So anyway, these are the things that I thought I should be kept in mind, because in these circumstances, and things are going to heat up later, in these circumstances it's not possible to write literature. So to come back to literature, what kind of literature is possible when the country is locked in a fight with another country and every single person is involved in the fight, directly or indirectly? In the case of Vietnam, the fight was direct, even in the case of children, even in the case of women, because they were being killed by not hundreds, by thousands. And there was a time when there were very few men left. So then women came out and they fought, and some children fought at that point of time. If that is the case, people don't have education, people can't even move around safely, and there would be no newspapers. So if there are newspapers, then they would carry only the war news, they would not carry other news, and the entire world is focusing upon the developments in Vietnam at that point of time. And there is no what is the requirement of literature? Literature requires rest, literature requires time away from work. Literature means that you sit down, you imagine, then you create voices in your mind that reflect your poetic bent. You create characters who represent tendencies, behavioral tendencies, social tendencies crystallized in their person. That is what literature means, and for that you require time away from work. And since that is not possible, so one doesn't know what to do. In fact, I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of writing in such a phase in the second part of the lecture when that happens. But till that time, let me tell you that these developments would definitely hinder any kind of expression and progress in the Vietnamese imagination, in the Vietnamese culture, in the Vietnamese way of looking at things artistically and effectively. So elections are held, and a new person is propped up, and that is supported by United States, and they will make policies that will go against the policies of Ho Chi Minh, who is ruling the North Vietnam. And since the fight is now going to be of one part against the other, so one would say that the country stands very clearly divided. 1956 and 1950, you see, we are already a free country, and we were indirectly, imaginatively involved in the fight in Vietnam, and that's why I'm giving all these figures to you. Indian writers, Indian thinkers, Indian journalists, Indian politicians, they were commenting upon the struggle in Vietnam. And since India was a freedom-loving country in the 1950s and 60s, therefore it felt involved in the whatever happened in Vietnam at that time. 56 then, Diem begins a crackdown on the Viet Minh. Viet Minh are the North Vietnamese. So he starts fighting the Viet Minh, which were controlled by Ho Chi Minh. Insurgent activity begins the following year, 57. Now, as I have already opened the topic of literature being written at this point of time, so there is a writer. I particularly picked up this woman writer, and she is a poet. Her name is Lam The Mai Da, and she is born in 1949, and she would be writing sometime in the 1970s, because at that point of time she would have seen all these things directly facing her, and she would write a different kind of literature. Now I'm going to read out a poem by her, and then we can discuss that poem. The poem is titled Speaking to the Heart. A woman talking to her heart. Heart means her emotions, heart means her feelings, heart means the things that she likes. And how does she speak to her heart? This is important, and the time that she would be writing this poem would be 1970s, the very time when things are very hot in the country in terms of destruction and fight. After a long night up writing poems, she starts with her own work. A streak of sunlight leapt into my room. How beautiful the line is. The sunlight, a part of sunlight, jumped into her room. Okay. I ran to the yard, to the angan outside the yard, running as if I were a child. She is a young woman, but as soon as she saw the sun, as she saw a part of the sun entering her place, then she went out running as a child. Footprints breaking the earth's first dew. You can see in imagination, the Vietnamese imagination is very natural, it's very nature loving. So, earth's first dew is important for them. What exactly is earth's first dew? When the first time that there are vapors in the atmosphere, and the first dew is very sensuous. You have a particular kind of smell on the earth. In the earth when the first raindrops fall on the soil, and is a very fine kind of fragrance comes up, and that's very appealing to the human senses. So, I'll just read it out, and then we can discuss in the second part. Footprints breaking the earth's first dew, chest brushing softly the short grass. See the details she is picking up. Chest brushing softly the grass. Earth and sky seeped into me like wine. Already she is feeling intoxicated. Startled, she is from within, she is slightly happily excited. Startled, I saw my heart in the shape of a plowshare. This is Vietnamese. You compare your heart with a plowshare. You don't you compare your heart with anything other than the thing that is associated with the plow. Resting on the earth's shoulder, the heart thumping steadily, plowing into time. So, I'll comment about this later, but just see the range of the poem. It starts from the heart of the woman, it goes to the plow, finally it goes into time. And what is time? Time is history. So, that kind of poetry was being written during the war against American imperialism, and before that against French imperialism. So, this is the kind of literature that emerges. She is not talking about any personal things. She is talking about nature. She is talking about her personal, the sensuousness, but that personal sensuousness is of all sensuous, all people who are sensuous. And then the element of the instrument of production, that is the plow, that is brought into it, and finally the time. So, we will talk about this poem and other things further, and now we will be taking up literature in a different way later. Thank you.
With this note, thank you so much for giving us this session. Dear friends, you are requested to be with us, as we are going to be back after a short break, and we are going to discuss more. So, keep watching us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on literature in Vietnam, and for the discussion we have with us in our studios Professor Anand Prakash. Professor Anand Prakash is a renowned professor of English as well as he is an author, editor, thinker, philosopher. Through him we always get maximum of the knowledge and we try to attain maximum through him. So friends, let's begin our lecture once again, and we promise you to give you more of knowledge. If you have any question pertaining to today's topic, then feel free to talk to us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800110430. I repeat, our number is 1800110430. Now I would like to welcome our guest, Professor Anand Prakash, once again. Hello sir, welcome back to the session.
Thank you, and welcome back viewers, and already you are conversant with the background that I gave you of the Vietnamese life, and that life helps us understand the agonies, the pains and the sufferings of the Vietnamese writer, and the writer is not depressed at all. Oh, that's the good part of it. I read out this poem towards the end of the first part of the lecture, and the woman was talking about this heart and the hearts, and she was speaking to the heart, and you can't see a single line that expresses sadness. She looks at she looks at nature and she is happy. She feels sensuous. She becomes a child when she looks at nature. And finally, she is talking about footprints breaking the earth's first dew, which is nature again, and that part which excites her imagination, excites her heart, excites her body. Chest brushing softly the short grass. Maybe she just went and she lay down there and she felt the softness of the grass on her body, and earth and sky seeped into me like wine. And when she looks at the earth, when she looks at the sky, then she feels intoxicated. And these things enter her body as if the body was getting and consuming wine. And then she is excited, startled, thrilled. I saw my heart in the shape of a plowshare, because she knows that she has to survive in this world with confidence, with self-assurance. So this is the first poem of this lady who was born when the war was going on, and she was a young woman when the war still continued, and in the course of facing such a situation, she wrote this poem. There is another poem of hers, and that will throw a kind of light on another aspect of writing, because first writing was an assertion by a human being with the help of nature. So when there is a bigger pressure on you at the level of imagination, at the level of emotions, then nature comes to your rescue. Nature comes to my rescue. I have pain somewhere, and I look around, and I look at the sun, I look at the moon, I look at water, I look at the grass, and I draw strength from these things. But then where is the direct experience? Because there is no direct experience. The person is hiding one's agony. The country is going, through a very destructive phase. And so I pick up another poem by her, and this time it will be a direct poem, and the poem is called Bomb Crater Sky. 3 words. Crater, is the kind of digging that happens because bombs fall. And from this poem, I picked up these lines, not the whole poem is longer, and just read these poems, these lines. They say that you, a road builder, had such love for our country, you rushed out and waved your torch to call the bombs down on yourself and save the road for the troops. There is a person who is building a road, and the person looks up, and there are bombs, war planes are flying flying in the sky over their heads, and they are going to bomb. Now this builder of the road says to the person who is throwing the bomb at him, on him, please don't destroy the road. Destroy me. You can drop the bomb on my head, kill me, but I am making this road for my troops. Those troops will fight you. So you fight the troops. Why do you fight me? Why do you destroy our roads? If you have any kind of fighting to do with us, then do it at that level. Your troops have come, but you are maybe killing civilians, and not only that, you are destroying our landscape, you are destroying our ecological system, you are destroying our forests, you are destroying everything that is there, you know, in Vietnam. So he is making a kind of a call, but see the courage. The courage is kill me. Why kill these things? You can see that this courage is also tempered by what is called sweetness, what is called, you know, a kind of smile. The person smiling says, why don't you kill me? It's not innocence. It's a very deep humanity that is captured in this poem. As my unit passed on that worn road, he is a part of the unit, he is a builder of the road, and there is a unit there. Unit also can mean the group of the army people. So these two meanings are mixed. As my unit passed on that worn road, the bomb crater reminded us of your story. There are always two stories in life. If two people are fighting, one story is of that person who is weak, the other story is of that person who is strong. Ask the weak person his story, and he will tell you about his problems and his desires and his wishes, and those desires and wishes are very human. And then go and ask the strong person, and his desires are not human. He says, I want to crush him, I want to teach him a lesson. How come, you know, that he raised his head against me, he raised his voice against me? So I will not allow this to happen, I will stop his voice. So you can see that the story is the same. The story is of a fight between two people. Ask the weak person, he has one story to tell. Ask the other one, he has a different story to tell, and both of them are as inimical to each other as the two people are. Your grave is radiant with bright colored stones. And here the word radiant is connected with the people who are killed along with the builder. The builder is looking at, you know, a grave, and his countryman, his country cousin has died there. So he calls about him. Your grave is radiant with bright colored stones, piled high with love for you, a young girl, as I looked in the bomb crater. How has the young girl come here? How has the love come here? Because these people who are fighting at that point in time and they are being bombarded, then they are still talking about the love episodes in their life. Maybe the girl, you know, is there in the imagination of the builder. Maybe the love is there in the imagination of the fighter who is next to the builder there. As I looked in the bomb crater where you die, see the gory scene. The bomb crater and the bomb created, you know, a kind of a ditch, a kind of a gaddha, and you look into it, and what do you see? And there, you know, some soldier has died. And then he talks about the rainwater became patch of the sky, our country is kind, water from the sky washes pain away. This is the scene of destruction, but he is still, you know, mixing that destruction and that horror with the kindness that he has in his own heart. And the kindness, you know, suggests to the readers there that these people are fighting for their life. They are not fighting for robbing anybody of one's resources. They don't want to control anybody else, because somebody came from outside and that person is killing them. Therefore, they have to get up and they have to fight that person. The other option is they would have said, okay, we become your slaves. But no, Vietnamese people would not become slaves of anybody. If somebody came to enslave them, then, you know, they would resist him, and that resistance would be not terrifying. That resistance would be, you know, forbearing, of you know, just telling the other person, we are strong and we will fight you, but then we know that our country is kind. Water from the sky washes pain away. What a beautiful line in the middle of the war, that, you know, there is pain in the body and then the man is suffering, but in the meantime it has started raining, and when it rains, then he says, water from the sky washes pain away. I am happy. From the last night, and then, you know, this poem, you understand, this poem about, you know, bomb craters, this poem is just, you know, from the war front, and this poem tells us about not just the human misery, it also talks about the human courage, the human resistance, the sense of struggling against all that they don't like. And you can see that even when the country is bombarded, even when, you know, bullets are flying from left to right and from right to left, even in the middle of that, they can talk of kindness, they can talk of love, they can talk of perseverance, they can talk of hard work, and they can say, don't do this, do this. You kill me, but don't destroy the road. This kind of a sense, this kind of a poise, this kind of a composure can be seen on the front, war front, is something unimaginable. Only in literature you can have this, because literature always emphasizes the resistance of the person who is right to that which is wrong. So there is a kind of a hope that created in literature, in the writer's mind and imagination, when he sees, when she sees this kind of a fight happening in front of oneself. Then I take you to a different kind of writing, and this is the prose writing, and the prose writing also of the personal kind. What can be more personal than, let's say, the diary? So we have a diary with us. It is available in English translation, and this diary carries within it, in each word, a kind of emotion that is worth millions, if one can think of that kind of association. It's a diary written by a person who is not a writer, but she is writing a diary, and in any case the act of writing always makes you a writer, and in fact a better writer. If you are a professional writer, then you would think of this and that. You would think of your training, you will think of the literature of the past, you can think of the contemporary writing, and then you will borrow the style of others. That's one kind of literature. I'm nothing against that literature. That literature also has a kind of identity. In fact, all the literature that we read these days is literature that is a part of the literary tradition. But here in Vietnam, there is a writing, and that writing, I am just giving you examples of that. That writing is of the people who suffer, and as they suffer, they write directly. So, for instance, this I'm going to quote certain portions, one portion from this diary. This diary is written by a doctor, a lady doctor, and she came from a good family, and she was born in Hanoi, and her father was highly educated. He was a scientist, and he wanted her to become a scientist also, and she said, okay, she will become a doctor. She became a doctor, and then she might have done research. She might have become a still bigger person than she was, but then she decided, no, my country is fighting. I'll go and look after the people who are wounded on the war front. So she, incognito, without telling anybody, and nobody knowing where she was going and who she was, she went to South Vietnam, and from there, for months she walked. It's unimaginable, viewers, that a young lady of 20 or so, 23 or 4, she had a burden on her back, and she walked for months to reach that place where the wounded soldiers would be there in hundreds and thousands, and she would look after them. And she had a past, and in the sense that she had easy moments of life. She had happy memories. She was in love with a boy who also respected her a great deal, and she carries all those stories and memories in her head. But then the foremost thing for her is the freedom of the country, is the fight for disallowing and slavery to another nation. And the story, and she never wrote to publish. In fact, this diary came on the surface much later after her death. She died on the war front, and one day, the soldiers from America, they would kill anybody on the roadside, suspecting that this person was a hidden soldier. And when a doctor was seen, and she was a doctor, and she would be mostly in the doctor's dress, then maybe they even thought that why is it that a doctor is treating people whom we want to kill? So whatever, I'm not going into all those details, but I say that this doctor, in her free time, was writing a diary. And I thought that this kind of literature is pure literature. This is a literature which talks about the emotions, because the emotions are felt directly by the writer. So the diary is today available. It is called The Last Night Dreamed of Peace. One is on the war front, and sometimes one can sleep also on the war front, and then the dreams of peace occur. And then the diary of Dang Thuy Tram. This is the name of the lady, and from this diary, there is an entry there in the diary on 12th April 1969. This is once again that period, when she is seeing death all around, destruction all around. And let's read this particular portion, this particular entry in the diary. She is talking to herself. There's no other person she can talk to. Everybody is wounded, everybody is groaning, everybody is unconscious, and they are lying. There are some dead bodies lying around her in the hut where her hospital is. And she is then, alone for some time. She grabs the paper and pen, and then she starts writing. And the question she is asking from herself is, what am I waiting for? What am I unsatisfied with? Why do I feel so frustrated? Perhaps there is nothing I want for myself. A woman who is giving all her life, all her comfort for the sake of wounded soldiers, she doesn't have anything of her own. What else can I ask? Everyone already loves and pampers me. She can say this on the war front. The people have great respect for her. The wounded soldiers, they think that she's just like their sister or mother, or like their beloved, who will take care of them every bit. Before my eyes, she says, life is verdant with hope. How can she think of hope, and in this kind of atmosphere, despite the clouds brooding in the corner of the sky? And she is so very poetic, in spite of the fact that she is not a poet. She can think of the clouds, in the corner of the sky, and those clouds appear brooding, thinking very quietly about something. You can see those clouds. Sometimes the cloud has a human figure. The cloud is bending on one side and looking downwards. So she's thinking of that cloud. Are duties making me restless? She asks a question from herself on the war front. What is the answer? Think of the answer. Her answer is, it's very possible. See the honesty. Maybe my duty is hanging heavy on my head. Maybe I feel restless. My tasks are heavy, she says, but there are not enough people. I am afraid I cannot guarantee the quality of my work. There are not enough people who can work with me, who can assist me, and I am afraid I cannot guarantee the quality of work. And what else, Thui? Her name is Thui, and she is talking to herself, and she says, what else can? And what else, Thui? Why is your heart ruled by sorrow and yearning when it is supposed to be totally devoted to the party? She is so very devoted to the party. She is so very in touch with the party that she thinks that sorrow should not be allowed to enter her head.
So we have a caller right now. Okay. I think we should take the caller first, and then we'll continue further.
Yes, definitely.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Please tell your name and ask your question.
My name is Pawan.
Yes, Pawan.
Madam, my question is, if we compare Vietnamese literature with Indian literature, what similarity and dissimilarity we can found?
His question is, if we talk about the literature of the two countries, that is Vietnam and India, what are the similarities and dissimilarities between the two?
You see, Pawan, there are similarities in the sense that writers would like peace. Writers would like to tell people that they should always, remain sensible. And if there is suffering, then suffering should be always, borne with courage, with fortitude. And in India, there are writers who talk to themselves many times. If you have heard poetry in Hindi, poetry in English, poetry in Bengali, then you know that the poet talks to oneself. But here, there is a difference. I am talking here about the war poetry. That kind of war poetry is not there in India except in the 1930s and 40s, when either the war is happening or resistance to imperialism is taking place. So you can think of poets like Subhadra Kumari Chauhan, who will write about the attack of the British army on Indian soldiers or Indian masses. You can see that. So there are similarities, and the difference is that here there is a woman who is talking from the war front. She is not a professional soldier, she is a doctor, and as a doctor she is not writing literature, and yet this is a higher kind of literature, more pure. So Pawan, I am sure you would have appreciated this. There is a difference and there are similarities. Similarities because women are peace loving and they are full of love, And when there is pain, then they suffer the pain. They don't say, I don't feel pain. They say very honestly that yes, there is pain. And this kind of writing is there in India, but only in parts. But here, it's at the center of this. So this is the difference and the similarity. And Pawan, I'm sure you would have you would agree with me in my understanding of the two countries and their culture, which have much in common.
Thanks, Pawan. Thanks for calling us. Now, I would like to ask Professor Anand Prakash to continue further. So, it's a humble request so that we could have more and more knowledge on the topic.
Thanks, then. Well, I was in the middle of appreciating this particular piece from Diary, and I can straight away say that this will make a very fine part of a novel, where a character is talking to oneself. It will, in fact, be a very fine part of a poem. In poets also, we see this kind of self-examination. And she says that my duty is on one side and my feeling is on the other. And should I blame my duty, my party? She says. And then the next in the same entry she continues. But the party does not say communist's heart knows only reason and work. She understands communism much differently than most others, because she is not a writer. So she is not feeling oppressed or repressed by the organization called the Communist Party. And she says, my party does not say you should know only reason and work. My party also allows me to have feelings. So there's a different kind of a party. I wish that India's party would allow their writers to also have not merely reason and work, but also feelings. And she's talking about this where again the answer is that she's on the war front, and very soon she will die. Somebody will come and put a pistol on her head and just kill her. But before that, she is sitting down to write this kind of a thing. So I suggest that this kind of poetry should be this kind of writing should be considered very high literature. Now I move towards the end of my lecture, and let me tell you that Vietnam became free from American imperialism in the 1970s. And after that, how many years have passed? About more than 40 years. So people who are born, let's say in 1970, today they would be 48 years, and which means that these people would not have any idea of what went on, in the Indochina, in this Vietnam American war. They would think that these things were there, but then now it's a different world. So there is a renewal in 1980s onwards. Literature is not the same. Earlier literature was about nature, was about other things, but now there is 2018. And in 1980s, a different wave of literature emerged on the scene. I call it renewal since 1985, and then there is a quote. It has reshaped national culture and inspired artists' creativity. National culture is there. Then they didn't have time to define national culture. They didn't know what nation was. They were fighting an enemy country, and that country had united them. But then what exactly is nation? How to visualize it? How to visualize the collectivity of the masses in the country where you live? And inspired artists' creativity. Those artists, they were writing just to express their anger, just to express their dissatisfaction, their dissent. And they didn't have time to think, and they didn't have to think as writers, as aware of the possibilities and experimental nature of language. These things they have started learning now. So the new phase is informed by what is called national culture, its requirements, and artists' creativity. The way you create art. See, when you create art, then you imagine, then you write, you use words. When you use words, then you are reminded of words of other writers. Therefore, either you change your words or you just follow the instinct of the other writer whom you like. So this is all creative, and writers have the time now to create, which they didn't have earlier. Biggest achievement was then in the later phase of a change of perception of human lives. Now you look at things differently. Vietnamese literature today is a literature of a different kind. To conclude then, one thing has specifically happened in Vietnam. Vietnamese students are going to the Western universities, they are going to America, they are going to England, they are going to France, they are going to Germany, they are coming to India. and there they learn things, and they learn their courses. When they learn their courses, then they know about the human heritage, and then their values are changing. And today's literature will resemble most of the literature of people elsewhere in the world. So in a way, Vietnam enters this new phase, and this new phase is the fuse of world literature, where all these people share their preferences, share their values, even share their way of resisting things. And if at some places in the world there is a fight, then these people become aware again. So that thing is also there. So I would say that they are now converging towards what can be called unity, which has cultural roots in it. And therefore, we say that today's Vietnamese literature, backed by the experiences of the last 100 years or last 60-70 years, is going to prove of great interest for the world literature to evolve and flower. So with these words, I come to the end of it, and I hope you have enjoyed the lecture, and you should think about it as much as possible, compare, contrast, and then learn your lessons from whatever happens in one's mind. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for giving us this productive session on literature in Vietnam. Dear friends, we believe that you might have gathered lots and lots of information, and you might have certain sets of questions in mind too. If you feel that your questions to be answered, then do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. We will try to give answers to your question when next time Professor Anand Prakash visits our studio, as well as you can give your feedback for this particular lecture too. We would be waiting for your messages, for your mails, and today we are taking your leave with the promise that we are going to meet again very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.
Thanks.